Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the New York State 2020 Cybersecurity Assistance Program. Thanks for taking times out of your very busy mornings and spending them here with us. Before we get started this morning, I have a couple real quick housekeeping items. Number one, we will have a short question and answers period at the end of the speakers' presentations. And number two, you will be able to submit your questions to the control panel in the chat room throughout this morning's presentation. So please take advantage of that and submit your questions when you have them. Thanks again for joining, and we will now begin our program. Next slide, please. My name is Corey Albrecht, and I am the Center Director at the Mohawk Valley Community College's Advanced Institute for Manufacturing, and we are the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center program here in the Mohawk Valley region, serving the 6 counties and the manufacturers which we have. My email information is below my name there. If you have any questions, after the presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the New York State Cybersecurity Assistance? This is a grant program, okay? This is a grant program which Mohawk Valley Community College recently applied for, and we were awarded this grant in June of this year. 3 main objectives and tasks as it relates to this grant. Number one is to establish a marketing and an outreach plan with Empire State Development, which includes leveraging regional assets across the state and coordinating outreach to maximize the potential company assistance. A minimum of 5 webinars to introduce the program and highlight the DFARS requirements and provide other pertinent information. Next slide, please. Task number 2 is to plan and execute webinars and workshops for New York State defense contractors to introduce the assistance program and answer questions regarding cybersecurity needs and regulations. These webinars and workshops will train companies how to perform a NIST SP 800-171 cybersecurity self-assessment and to determine if they need additional resources to help perform the assessment and potential remediations. At the conclusion of the webinars and the workshops, the trainees will have the option to take a self-assessment. A minimum of 250 Department of Defense contractors will be engaged through these activities of workshops and webinars. And the final task is to assist companies that do not have the financial resources or the available staff to perform these assessments on their own. Follow-on implementation of the projects will be on an as-needed basis determined by the assessments and if the company is ready to take on such tasks at that time. At least 67 defense-related companies will be assisted with these assessments, and the companies receiving assistance should be from as many regions across New York State as possible. Next slide, please. And finally, our partners for this grant. All successful grant partners are, all successful grant programs are made possible through the strategic partners which we align ourselves with. The first partner, as you see on your screen here, is Empire State Development. This is the origin of the grant. The money for the grant flows down through ESD. And then next you see Mohawk Valley Community College and the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. We are the recipients of the grant and the administrators of the grant on a statewide level. And then finally, you see our 3 strategic business partners, which we have aligned ourselves with for this grant, and that is Fuse Hub, Twin State Technologies, and MTech. And at this time, I'd like to introduce everybody to my colleague from Fuse Hub, Everton. Everton is the New York State MEP Solutions Director, and he will lead us into more tactical details of the grant and also how to access the grant and its benefits. So with that, Everton.
Good morning. As Corey said, my name is Everton. I'm the New York MEP Solutions Director for Fuse Hub. Fuse Hub is a statewide MEP center, and we operate in all 62 counties in New York State. Next slide, please. So Corey mentioned the 3 tasks earlier for the grant. And in order to accomplish that, we've introduced the concept of a cohort. So what does this really mean? What we're trying to do with the cohort is to be able to satisfy the requirement of the task of bringing a minimum of 250 manufacturers into compliance by learning how to do self-assessment. The cohort concept will require us to get at least 320 manufacturers as members. These manufacturers will be part of the DoD supply chain. And what we mean by that is if you're a manufacturer and you make something for someone that makes something, for someone who makes something that makes something for the DoD, then you are part of the DoD supply chain and therefore eligible to become a member of this cohort. So what will we provide to you? The concept is going to allow you to access resources from us and be able to participate in network opportunities from our statewide members in this DoD cohort. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to note that there will not be a charge for being a member of this cohort. So this program consists of the following benefits. Of course, we will conduct a 5-part webinar series on cybersecurity, and that's part of the original task. We'll be presenting an interactive 9-session training course that can be taken online at your own pace to prepare manufacturers to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements. Now, it's important to note that as an integral part of our task 2, we have to be sure that the folks who are members, at least 250 of you, be able to come away with the ability to do self-assessment. In addition to this, we'll be offering financial assistance to manufacturers with financial and staff restraints to conduct assessment of DoD compliance. Our objective is that by April 2021, we hope to enroll a minimum of 320 DoD supply chain manufacturers in the cohort and have them complete the online training. From the 320 member cohort, we'll be choosing 6 to 7 manufacturers, and we will conduct 6 to 7 physical assessments, awarding them up to $6,000 each to complete this assessment. Next slide, please. We will also be providing, as we mentioned before, online self-paced on-demand interactive course. There'll be 9 modules, and we hope to do this through the Teachable platform, and this will be covering the cybersecurity families as described by the NIST SP 800-171. There will be a learning assessment, which is a little quiz after each module, and at the end of it, we'll provide a certificate for the final module. I won't read through all 14 members of the family, but if you become a member, you'll be exposed to all of them. Next slide, please. As we mentioned before, we'll be providing a 5-part webinar series, of which this is the first one. We'll be following up with the next one on the 27th of October. This are the industry standards and requirements, and that will be done by our very own Paul Laporte and MTech and Twin State Technologies. The next one will be on November 24th, which will be titled Enemies and Attack, and that will be done by the Cybersecurity Director at MVCC, which is Jake Maheving. The fourth one, which would be on December 15th, this will be done by one of our New York State resources, and this is called The Threat at Home. And finally, on January 26th, we will be doing the final one, General Advice on Pointers. In addition to these 5 webinar series, we'll also be doing 3 workshops. The first one we'll be doing in October in the Mohawk Valley, and we'll be sending information out about that. This is all part of the training that we hope to provide to the cohort. Now, please, in order to qualify to be a part of the 6 to 7 companies receiving that financial aid we talk about, you must be a member of the cohort. So we encourage you, if you're a manufacturer in the DoD supply chain, you should apply to be a member of the cohort. And speaking about the webinar series, I'm going to introduce you next to our very own Paul Laporte. Could I have the next slide, please? And Paul is a cybersecurity coordinator for MVCC. He will be going through the rest of the slides, but he'll also be providing information to you so you know where to register to be a part of this cohort. Thank you. Take it away, Paul.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good morning, and thank you for joining us here for this webinar. So as Everton mentioned, I am the cybersecurity coordinator for the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. I've been doing it just for about 4 years now. I started in October of 2016. Prior to that, I did a lot of IT work in kind of every space you can think of, insurance, education, engineering. I've kind of done a lot of different things over time. But one of the things that I enjoy so much about working in manufacturing is that I get to work with a lot of incredibly smart people who just haven't dedicated their smarts and their brains to this particular subject. So I get to kind of teach all of these genius people who work with incredibly technical machines and tools some of my knowledge. And I like to do that for anybody who I haven't talked to at all through this kind of introductory method, because cybersecurity is a topic that is a little obscure. It's a little esoteric if you're not somebody who is comfortable with information technology, but it's by no means something that you cannot grasp at all. Because of this, there are a lot of different myths and misconceptions about what cybersecurity is and is not that pop up. And that's the purpose of this presentation today, is that we're going to try and sort out some of those, try and sort out myths from reality, and try and explain to you how you can do certain things around cybersecurity without some of the roadblocks that a lot of people tend to associate with it. So let's go ahead and start off with what cybersecurity is. So the definition of cybersecurity is that it is the body of technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, computers, programs, and data from attack, damage, or unauthorized access. In a computing context, security includes both cybersecurity and physical security. So this is a very dense wall of text with a lot of jargon in it. So what I like to do is I like to take this definition and break it out and highlight the more important parts that, again, people may not necessarily associate with the subject. So the first line here, cybersecurity is the body of technologies, processes, and practices. So technology is something that everybody associates with cybersecurity, but really the more important parts of it are these parts right here, the processes and the practices. The idea that we are actually taking steps and methods in the real world to protect the information that we're looking to secure. Designed to protect networks, computers, programs, and data. Again, these few things everybody kind of associates with cybersecurity: digital stuff, networks, computers, programs, but data. So data can be digital as well. Obviously, it's files stored on your computer, things you're trying to protect, but data can be a lot of stuff in the real world as well. It can be blueprints, it can be notes written down on a actual notebook stored in an actual filing cabinet. It can be copies of receipts, invoices, things like that that are printed out that we want to protect, because if we don't, then that can potentially do us harm as well. From attack, damage, or unauthorized access. So a lot of cybersecurity is dedicated to protecting us from the attack right here, the idea that somebody is trying to maliciously do us harm. But in reality, a lot of cybersecurity concerns tend to come from damage. It's just accidental, things that people who work for us did and they either shouldn't have done or didn't mean to do. We want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, not just from people who are actively trying to hurt us, but we want to try and make sure that we can't hurt ourselves as well. And in a computing context, security includes both cybersecurity and physical security. Again, cybersecurity, digital stuff, it's the thing that everybody thinks about. Physical security, though, that is something that is associated with it as well, and things that we need to concern ourselves with. Rather than just protecting ourselves in the digital world, we have to make sure that our real world spaces are protected as well. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit further on into the presentation in detail. All right, so moving on to what I've outlined in this time, 4 major myths that kind of circulate in the most popular spaces of business that people tend to think are the actual case. These are things that I hear a lot when I go into a company for the first time and have kind of our initial discovery interviews. And each of these myths are kind of fueled by a key misconception that helps perpetuate these falsehoods that tend to go through. So let's go ahead and move on to the first one here. This is probably the biggest one that I see in terms of the small and medium manufacturers that I talk to, especially on the very low end when you're talking like 5 people or less. And that's the idea that I'm too small to be attacked. You know, I am not Walmart. I am not Amazon. I am not Equifax. I am not one of these humongous companies that deal with millions and millions of dollars. I'm a small machine shop. I make screws that go into cabinets. I do $300,000 a year in business. People aren't concerned with me. I don't need to worry about cybersecurity. The reality, though, is that small and medium manufacturers are one of the most popular targets for attackers in the US because of a reduced concern for cybersecurity. It's a low priority for these companies, and as a result, they are easier to get into. Is the payoff for successfully attacking a small and medium manufacturer going to be the same as succeeding at Walmart or Amazon? No, of course not. But they are vastly easier to get into, and if you can hit a number of them at very little investment of your resources and your effort, that tends to add up. So this myth is fueled by the misconception that is known as security through obscurity. And this is a cybersecurity principle or fallacy. And this is true for actual just regular security in general. It's the idea that you're safe because you're not well known. So it's the idea that if you are somebody that's a very small business and not a lot of people know about you, you don't have a big presence in the world, that you're probably going to be looked over for some of those bigger targets. Unfortunately, unless you are, you know, your facilities are out in the desert somewhere and you don't have any employees and you're not connected to the internet at all, this is a fallacy, because the whole idea of business is we are trying to make ourselves as well known to as many people as we possibly can. And even if we are a small business, this ignores the fact that these attacks can come from potential competitors, current or former employees, local attackers with possible agendas, such as disgruntled customers, family members of somebody who works at the company, and there's an estranged relationship there. There are a lot of different areas and a lot of different ways that people can try and do us harm. And we can't just rely on the fact that, hey, I'm a small business, people aren't really going to pay attention to me to get us through. Really what you're doing in that case is you are essentially putting the livelihood of your company into the hands of somebody and saying, this is up to you how much trouble you want to go through. If you want to take the effort to take me down, then you're basically putting your life in somebody else's hands. And even if you're a small company, there's a lot of stuff you can do to protect yourself on a basic level to prevent these types of attacks from happening to you. Second myth that we run into a lot, cybersecurity is too expensive. Now, I'm not going to lie, you can go down lots of rabbit holes here and spend a lot of money on cybersecurity. There are lots of pieces of equipment, lots of services that you can subscribe to that will cost you very large amounts of money. And certainly larger industries do spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on cybersecurity. However, that does not mean that that is what cybersecurity is. The reality is that there are many things that you can do to improve your cybersecurity foundation that cost nothing and can be done with a minimal time investment. Now, the misconception that powers this myth is something that's known as completion paralysis. So this is the idea that if all cybersecurity problems can't be solved at once, nothing can be done or should be done until they can. So another common scenario that I run into when I'm talking to a manufacturer and we're discussing a cybersecurity assessment or some sort of project is they'll say, okay, well, we're interested, but we want to wait until the next fiscal year. That's always a big one. Let's carry it over to the next fiscal year, and then we will tackle all of our problems then, because they know that they're going to have to spend some money. Maybe they have some out-of-date computers. Maybe they know they need to add a piece of networking equipment. They've kind of done some preliminary research into how much that's going to cost, and they decide, well, I can't do that thing right now, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to put cybersecurity as a whole on the back burner until I can actually tackle this situation. Unfortunately, cybersecurity attackers are not going to wait until your next fiscal year to try and attack you. They are going to try at any time of day and night, at any time of the year, 24/7, 365 days a year. So you need to do as much as you can in lieu of actually spending that money to prepare yourself for anything that might come through. There we go. So some of the things that you can do instead of spending money are things that'll cost either a little investment or no investment at all. The first one is you can perform a risk assessment to identify your current issues. So this is really the first step for anybody if you're taking on a cybersecurity project, or at least it should be. And you can do this internally with your own staff, or you can hire an outside service to do that. This is probably one of the biggest things that I do working for the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing, is working with cybersecurity assessments for companies, seeing where they're at and where they need to go. But that doesn't need to be with a third-party company. You can just take a look at, hey, what's the information that we need to protect? What are we doing to protect it? Is there anything that we can improve on? And then from there, you can look to improve security for your current systems and devices. So you can look to see what changes you can make to the settings in your servers or your individual computers. See if you can increase permissions so people only have access to the information that they need to do their day-to-day work. You can make sure that only your IT department or your IT management team can make changes to the operating systems and the settings in the computers. You can develop company policies for handling information. So again, defining to your employees what needs to be done with your critical information, where it should be saved, if you have to send it to somebody, how to do that, what can be sent and what can't. These are all things that can be outlined in an employee handbook and don't cost you anything. Train employees on how to handle data safely. So once you have those policies constructed, make sure that you are actually communicating them to your employees through some sort of formal training. Certainly your new employees should be made aware of this stuff through new employee orientation, but your existing employees can be made aware of it as well through morning meetings, one-on-one sessions, classroom environment, a lot of different ways you can get this information across. You can also take this time to start to plan on investments that you'll need to make in the future. So if you do know that you're going to need to upgrade all of your computers, or buy a piece of networking equipment, or purchase some sort of managed service, you can take the time in advance to shop around, see exactly what you need, rather than getting something that's going to be too much or not enough for your actual requirements. You can make sure that you are getting the most value for your dollar invested if you have more time. The less time you have, the more you have to kind of panic, and the less opportunity you have to figure out what's going to be best for you. So you can take some time to figure that out and then go from there once that next fiscal year rolls around, or once you're ready. Myth number 3, I'll just buy insurance instead. So this is a common way of dealing with a lot of other disasters or issues or problems that might arise in your business. Everybody has some sort of insurance on their facilities, on their equipment, on their employees. So if something happens to any of them, you can get reimbursed by an insurance company, and then that will help cover the cost of that disaster. You'll actually see this a lot in, if you go to the About Us section of a lot of different companies, somewhere in their history, they probably had something happen to them, especially if they're an older company. If they're like older than 50 years old, their facilities burned down, or they had a flood, or some sort of disaster befell them that they were able to recover from, and they were kind of able to wear that as a badge of honor, like, hey, we had this fire in 1965 that burned down our whole facilities, but we've rebuilt ourselves and now we're better and stronger than ever. The problem is you can't do that with cybersecurity, because while cybersecurity insurance can be helpful in recovering from an attack, it doesn't help repair the elements of an attack that cause most businesses to collapse. Now, the misconception that fuels this one is the idea of reactive response. It's dedicating the majority of cybersecurity resources to recovering from an attack in the event one happens, rather than preventing the attack from happening in the first place. Cybersecurity is one of those things that a lot of people are kind of gun shy on spending money on, because the idea of spending money for something that might never happen to you doesn't really feel that good. So there are cybersecurity insurance policies out there that you can take out. A lot of companies like to go that route because, hey, maybe this thing will never happen to me, but if it does, I still have some sort of safety net. The problem with that is that the greatest damage that a cybersecurity attack causes is not to any devices or information, but it's to the reputation of the company. If trust is lost from key clients and they're unable to gain new business, it's going to be extremely difficult to survive that event. In the cases that we mentioned before, fires, floods, all those sorts of natural disasters, that is your stuff that's being damaged. That is the equipment and the property of the business that's being damaged, and that's bad. But once you get productivity back up and going, that's not really a problem for your customers. However, in the event of a cybersecurity attack, the thing that is being damaged, destroyed, stolen is their stuff. It's their information. So as a result, even if you did have some sort of insurance policy to repair the damage or get things back up and running, now their reputation is damaged because of that, because their information got out, because you have put their business at risk. So waiting until after the disaster happens, like in those other cases, is not something that's necessarily viable because of the fact that you are dealing with your customers' information. And because of this, 60% of small businesses that are the victim of a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months. Companies must adapt a proactive mindset rather than a reactive one, doing all they can to prevent the attack from happening in the first place and damaging their reputation. So when these companies are attacked, especially if you're a small business with just a few key clients, like a few big customers that are kind of keeping your entire company afloat, if you're the victim of a cyber attack and their information is compromised because of that, then you are going to lose their trust, and it is possible that you are going to lose them as a customer. And because your reputation is damaged, it's going to be difficult to get a new customer in to replace them. And a lot of times companies just cannot sustain themselves through that period where everybody realizes that their reputation might be at stake with this company if they do business with them. Now, if you're a huge company like a Walmart, like a Target, you can usually weather the storm. You will lose some business to begin with, but so many cybersecurity attacks happen so frequently that eventually people are going to forget about it. But if you're a small business, you're probably not going to be able to float this amount of time where people still have it fresh in their minds that you've put their information at risk and that you could potentially do so in the future. All right, and the fourth and final myth that we're going to talk about, myth number 4, I will let my IT staff handle it. So this is the idea that if you are working at a company of any type, manufacturer, retailer, doesn't matter. It's the idea that cybersecurity is something that the IT department is responsible for solely, and that they are going to handle all of the problems that may arise, all of the things that you'll need to do. They're going to take care of it. Unfortunately, the reality, wrong way, there we go. The reality is that protecting information is the responsibility of every single person that handles that information. It is not reasonable to expect the IT department to handle all of the cybersecurity when they're not the ones that are handling all of the information that you're trying to protect. Information is being handled by your payroll, your accounting, your human resources, by your receptionist. It is not just handled by the IT department. Therefore, they cannot realistically be the only ones that are in charge of keeping your information safe. They can handle the technological side of things, but they're not going to be able to protect you in every single avenue because they're not the only ones that are handling this information. And the misconception that powers this one is known as technological reliance, believing that cybersecurity is solely a technological issue and that understanding it is out of reach of anyone who isn't dedicated to information technology. Again, when I go to people, when I talk to people who are not familiar with information technology and I tell them I do cybersecurity, they have this idea in their heads that it's just kind of magic or sorcery that takes place, and they can't possibly get their heads around it, but that's not true. Cybersecurity is really just making sure that you are handling your information responsibly so people cannot get it from you easily by using some of the most common methods of attack. Strong cybersecurity also means protecting yourself physically as well. If an attacker can physically touch the device they're trying to gain access to, their likelihood of success increases dramatically. So we mentioned it in the beginning of the presentation that physical security is an element of cybersecurity as well. And this is the reason why. If somebody is trying to do you harm, again, typically somebody who's either local or works for you, if they can actually touch the device that they're trying to get information from, their likelihood of success goes through the roof. So it doesn't matter if you have $100,000 worth of cybersecurity equipment, or you have a managed service that's monitoring your every move. If your doors are unlocked at night and I can walk in and steal some prints, or if your server room has a nice big window in it that I can throw a rock through and take your server home with me. Doesn't really matter if you have all of those things in place. You want to make sure that you're protecting yourself physically as well. You want to make sure that your resources, your key network infrastructure is in an area that only your information technology department can access. You want to make sure that your building is protected from people who don't necessarily work at the company. You also want to make sure that your entryways into the building are locked and monitored at all times, and have separate entries for non-employees that require them to log their visit as well. So you can have a designated reception area for people who come in. They have to sign a logbook that says, hey, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, this is who I'm here to see. Here's the time I came in, here's the time I left. So if something happens that day, you have a record of everybody who is in your building. These are all things to consider when we're looking at physical security. Now, when considering all of these things, the most important thing to remember is that attackers are going to attempt to exploit the weakest area of any given target. This is very commonly the staff that is handling the information if they're not properly trained. At the cutting edge of technology, all the cutting edge technology in the world will not protect your company if the people with access to your information can be tricked into giving it away. And that's, again, where we're looking at these important areas as far as making sure you have good policies and your staff are properly trained. Because, again, if these people have access to your information and they can be convinced or tricked into giving it to somebody or downloading a program that they're not supposed to that gains them access to that information, then that is going to be just as big of a vulnerability for your company as having a weak IT infrastructure. Now, some of the ways that you can consider these things and help your cybersecurity foundation is to promote cybersecurity awareness via employee training. Again, make sure that everybody in the company knows the data that they're handling and knows how to handle it responsibly. From your CEO to your receptionist to your maintenance department and everybody in between, you want to make sure that those people know what's at stake with the information that they have and what to do with it. You want to conduct regular meetings to clarify confusion or introduce new ideas. If there's any new policies or new pieces of equipment that you've purchased, you want to make sure that people know how to use those things and are aware that they're there. You want to encourage communication and early response. Again, the idea that people are talking to each other. If something seems weird, if there's a lot of people who are all of a sudden getting the same type of email that's trying to get information from them, it's better if they report that to somebody so they can see if there's maybe some sort of bigger issue rather than just a one-off spam email that's coming through. And finally, you want to make sure that employees are not afraid to admit their mistakes. Again, fear and miscommunication are the biggest friends of attackers. The more obscure they can be, the more they can operate in the darkness, the better off they are. So you want to make sure that your employees know that, yes, here are the rules, here are what you should do, but in the event that you make a mistake or you do something that you're not supposed to do, here's who you can tell, and you don't have to worry about your job being lost. And again, that's where we see a lot of these kind of bigger attacks propagate, is because somebody has more permissions than they should. They download a file that they thought was something else, or they give away information to somebody who they thought was somebody else, and then they realize it. They go, oh no, I realize I've made a mistake. And they have two choices. They can go to their supervisor, they can go to their boss, the IT department, whoever, and tell them, or they can say nothing. And if they are scared that they're going to lose their job or that they're going to be punished for the mistake they made, it is a lot more likely that they're just going to kind of back away from the computer, go home for the day, and hope it all sorts itself out in the morning. And as a result of that, what could have just been an issue with one computer now becomes an issue with the entire company. And that is all because they were afraid of their livelihood. So you want to make sure that employees know, hey, here are the rules, here's what you should do, here's what you shouldn't do. But in the event something happens, it's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. If it keeps happening, then maybe you need additional training or we need to take some other steps. But if you make a mistake, here's who you tell. Let's just sort it out as quickly as we can. Because again, part of cybersecurity is not just protecting us from having the thing happen to begin with, but in the event that it does happen, we want to minimize the damage, and communication is the most important part of that. So those are, again, kind of the four biggest areas that when I'm talking to somebody, those are the misconceptions that they tend to have. Hopefully this information today helped clear up some of those things. If you have any other additional questions, My contact information is in here. And again, we hope to see all of you sign up for the cohort, and I may see some of you down the line for some cybersecurity assessment projects. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn things back over to Corey. The information is on the screen if you are interested in registering for the other cybersecurity webinars that we're going to have coming up, and also as well if you are interested in registering again for that zero cost cohort where we're going to have that online teachable course that is going to instruct you on how to do self-assessments. So thank you for your time. Corey, I turn it back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Great job. Yeah, folks, as you can see, we do have the links are there in front of you to access both the webinar series. Again, this was only part 1 of a 5-part series, and you can also see the registration for the cohort, and that again is how you access this 2020 Cybersecurity Assistance Grant. Just as a reminder, and a couple questions are beginning to come in the chat room. The chat room is still open, so if you have those questions, we do have about 20 to 25 minutes. We have a good chunk of time here to address any questions or concerns or comments that you may have. So with that being said, we're going to start with the questions. Paul, the first one looks like it will be directed towards you. I have a question coming in from the attendees stating, how will I be able to take what I've learned in these webinars and have my staff implement the recommendations?
So for those, I believe that these are going to be made available as recordings. So, you can show that to them. We should also be making the slides available as well. I mean, that's usually the case. If you are interested in communicating that to your employees, if you've taken the tips here and you like them, let us know. Just reach out to us, contact us, and we can make those resources available to you. And then again, you can sign up for the future ones. Again, if you are interested in if you have the staff that is capable to do this sort of thing, whether it's the actual assessments or if you're just looking for more cybersecurity knowledge in general, again, I would encourage you to sign up for the cohort, no cost to that. And there's going to be a ton of information that's going to be in that. And yes, it is geared towards self-assessments and kind of performing things for DoD manufacturers, but there's just going to be a lot of good cybersecurity awareness in there as a whole, because that kind of just comes with that assessment part. So reach out to us, we'll get you this information, check out the future webinars and sign up for the cohort.
Thanks, Paul. One other question's coming in here. Everton, this is about the cohort, so I'll direct this question to you if I can, please. Somebody's asking here, how long will the cohort applications be available for, and how do I register for the cohort?
Okay, so the registration for the cohort is very simple. If you look at your screen right now, you will see that Paul has left it up there. It's on the NewYorkMEP.org cohort apply, and you can apply right there. So we are going to do this all the way through April of this year. We would encourage you though to apply sooner, because we have a limited amount. So we're talking about 320 manufacturers within the cohort. And we have a program, a training program that we have to go through to cover the entire group. So you don't really want to wait and be left out of the cohort. And remember, if you have financial restraints that you need some assistance, you will not be eligible for the grant unless you're part of the cohort. And if the cohort is already full, then you will not be eligible for this particular grant. So we encourage you to register for it as early as possible. And so the quicker you get involved, the quicker you'll be able to get done with the training program and get your certificate.
Great, thanks, Everton. Paul, here's another question I'll direct your way if I can, please. You mentioned a small to medium-sized manufacturers and attacks that have been taking place. Can you provide us with either real or hypothetical examples of the types of attacks that you're seeing with small to mid-sized manufacturers today?
Yeah, so in general, the most popular and the most successful cybersecurity attacks really kind of come in 2 flavors. The first is ransomware. So this is the idea that somebody has sent a file that's usually disguised as something else. Somebody within the company downloads that file, opens it, and then it replicates to other computers within the network, goes into the hard drives of those computers and locks up the information in them. And then once it's gone for about 24 hours, 48 hours or so, it'll pop up a warning screen and say, hey, your information is locked up. send $200 to this, to this address or whatever. There are a lot of different ways that you can make these payments through prepaid cards. If you do not, then within 24 hours or 48 hours, your information's gone forever. So this is, again, ransomware. This is something that has hit. It's very popular with all types of business. It's popular with local government, with school systems, healthcare systems, because it, again, relies on the notion that a lot of people don't know how to back up their information correctly. And if they don't back up their information, then this is the only way they have to access it. And if that's gone, then their whole business or their whole framework is gone. So it's very popular for that reason, because you can really, like the name says, hold a company at ransom. And it's usually like a fairly low dollar amount, $200 to $1,000 at the absolute highest end. But if you can hit 10, 20, 30 companies with it, that tends to add up very quickly. So that's a very popular one that we've especially seen kind of come through in the past 5 years or so. The other really popular one, and this is kind of through a variety of different methods, but it all goes under the umbrella of what's known as social engineering. So this can be done through an email, it can be done through a phone call, it can be done through a web page that's meant to look like something else. But it's basically the idea of using somebody's lack of cybersecurity to trick them into giving information to you. So common example of this, what we'll see in like your regular day-to-day life, is you get an email from the IRS saying, hey, we have your tax return available. Follow this link, give us your bank account information, and we'll set it up for direct deposit. In reality, it's not the IRS. They wouldn't do it that way anyways. And when you put in your bank information, then you've given that to somebody else who then just makes a bunch of charges on your account or steals the money from you. So that can be done through a variety of ways. It can be done through, again, phishing emails. So again, probably something we've all seen. It can be done through phone call. Hey, I'm from Microsoft Technical Support. We're doing some work on your computer. I just need your password so I can make some updates. And if you're just not somebody who is terribly familiar with IT, then you could be tricked into doing that. So really, those are the two most popular ways, because they can both be done through very relative little effort on the part of the attacker. They can just kind of send out the program to 1 million people and see who responds. They can send out the email to 1 million people and see who comes back. So those are kind of the biggest ways that we see from any sort of outside attack. And again, those things are really just protected by making sure your employees know what those things look like, know what a false email looks like as opposed to a real one, know what information to give away in an email or to not give away. Those are the things that you can do to protect yourself, and those are far and away the most common things we see.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Everton, we have a question I'd like to ask here. An attendee is referencing the Cybersecurity Grant Award, and one of the 67 companies awarded for the assessment conducted by one of our implementation teams. And the question is, you mentioned a $6,000 grant. Does that cover the entire cost, and what other funds might be needed?
Okay, so we estimate the cost of the assessment to be around $7,500, and per the grant requirement, the company is required to pay 25% of that. So our belief here is that not 25%, 20%. So our belief here is that if it's a $7,500, you'd really be paying $6,000. If it's really so I should run through those numbers. I think it's 15%, right, Corey? I think it's 15% we talked. So that would be make it $1,500 out of a $7,500 that the company would have to pay.
Correct.
However, we are very cognizant of the fact that different areas of the state might incur different costs, and the size of the company may incur more work. For example, if you're, let's say you are in the Long Island area, when you calculate all the costs associated, travel, etc., it could possibly exceed the $7,500 we talked about. And so the company would be expected to pay the difference. So the minimum contribution from the company would be 15%, but it could get higher. So as an average, we believe, based on our experience from the last time we did this in 2019 grant, that $7,500 would be adequate for an assessment, and so $6,000 would be the grant amount.
Great. Thank you, Everton. Yeah, just to a recap, we're looking to make 67 awards of $6,000, And the average cost of the assessment, again, average is about $7,500. So the contribution from the company, from the manufacturer, will be roughly $1,500 for the assessment. So thank you, Everton. Let's see, Everton, another question is coming in. I think I'll send your way and I'll assist as well here. How do we find out whether we've been approved for the cohort? I believe that there's an attendee or a company on this call that quite possibly could have just applied. So I think this will go into our weekly registration review committee meetings that we'll have. Can you comment on that a little bit, please?
Yes, we have a review committee and we will get together once a week. And I believe that the plan is doing it every Monday, and we will review all the companies that we have in our cohort list, and we will select them based on the criteria that's spelled out in the grant, which has to be financial restraint and the personnel to be able to do this. From that, we will select the company, and as soon as the company is selected, we will notify the company and we will begin.
Great. Paul, we have a question coming in. I'll direct towards you, and I know that in the preceding webinars, you'll get into a little bit about the CMMC model here. How do you plan on incorporating CMMC into this grant program today, as you will be using the 800-171 as the implementation tool? How do you plan on integrating CMMC?
Yes, so getting a little bit into the nuts and bolts of the IT side of the grant, or the cybersecurity side of the grant, it was specifically designed to prepare people for NIST 800-171, because that is what is required of the DFARS clause as of right now. So we wanted to make sure that people were prepared for the things that they needed to be prepared for immediately. Now, that being said, obviously the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, is something that everybody is kind of aware of, that it is going to be rolled out over the next few years. Right now, they are working on developing training for their assessors and starting to build that framework for assessments. And in the coming years, people are going to be required to meet some level of CMMC certification. Now, if you are somebody who has to meet NIST 800-171 requirements as part of your DFARS clause currently, it's estimated to believe that you're almost certainly going to have to register at CMMC level 3. CMMC level 3 and 800-171 are actually quite similar. The only thing that's different between the two is that there's about 20 additional controls in the CMMC level 3 as there are in 800-171. So in 800-171, there's 110. CMMC level 3, there's 130. And they're not super far from where we're at with 800-171 as it is. But what we're doing in these assessments is, yes, we want to get you ready for 800-171 to meet those requirements. However, when we do those assessments, in addition to pointing out the areas of the 800-171 that you're going to need to meet, we are also going to highlight those additional 20 areas for CMMC level 3. So again, it's really just to kind of give you a head start to make you think about what you're going to need to do down the line when CMMC actually becomes implemented and required for all those companies. So in addition to the 800-171 parts, we are going to include those parts in our assessments as well, so people can use that to prepare for when that day comes that they'll need to actually register.
So Corey, I would like to make a comment. So while Paul was speaking, I went back and looked at the grant, and the requirement is a minimum of 20% contribution. So I misspoke at first. That would result in $1,500 that the company would have to spend on a $7,500 assessment. So the maximum amount of the grant is $6,000, and the costs to the company could exceed $1,500 depending on the size of the company and the cost for doing business within that particular area. But I would say for the average across the state, we would be talking about $7,500 with a $6,000 contribution. So once again, I misspoke and I apologize. It is 20% minimum contribution required by the grant. Thank you.
Thanks, Everton. Everton, it looks like we have a startup on the webinar this morning, and they're asking a question relating to whether or not they qualify for both the cohort and then for one of the 2 grant awards. They are a startup and they will be shipping before the end of the year. Would you like to speak? And I can certainly add to this one as well. Would you like to speak on whether or not they qualify for the cohort and also one of the two grant avenues for awards?
Where there's a further question there. They will be shipping to whom? Will they be a DoD supplier?
Yeah, it's not stated in the chat.
Well,
I would just comment on that, and then I'll let you take it too, Everton. We do not have, your organizations do not, a couple of things. You don't have to be a DoD manufacturer to take part in this 5-part webinar series. The 5-part webinar series is open to all manufacturers across the state of New York. To join the cohort, you have to have either an existing contract in place with the Department of Defense, or you have to be participating somewhere in the supply chain. And you could be a supplier of a supplier that now has an active and existing DoD contract. But in order to join the cohort, you would have to, again, have some type of existing contract somewheres in the greater supply chain. And then, of course, once you are registered in the cohort, you are eligible to receive one of the two grant awards. You can be one of the minimum of 250 DoD suppliers that can access the teachable 9 module training, self-assessment, training you and your team in your organization how to self-assess your organization regarding cybersecurity. Or you can be one of the 67 recipients of the up to $6,000 grant award, where one of our 3 implementation teams, we perform the assessment for you at your organization. So really the key is, do you have an existing or current DoD contract today, or are you somewheres in that supply chain? Everton, you want to fill in anything regarding that question?
The only thing I would add, it is possible that there may be an existing purchase order from a DoD contractor requiring you to supply parts that will be going to the DoD. And in this particular case, we would look at that as a possibility.
Yeah, there's a little further information here in the chat, Everton. It says Department of Defense is a target client, but not shipping to them until they show interest.
Well, they will not qualify under the guidelines right now. They have to be actually doing business with either the DoD directly or a supplier of the DoD, and in some way actually have some sort of a financial arrangement wherein they're being paid for parts being supplied in the DoD supply chain.
Right. Thank you, Everton. Paul, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left here. I'd like to direct this question to you if I could. We have an attendee looking to address something here. How do I justify the time and the expense? What is the end result? Do I get a certificate? Am I listed on the DoD website? What is the end result for me as a business owner?
So in terms of the project that's associated with the grant, the end result is that you're going to be provided with a couple things. The first is a detailed report of basically where you are right now. It's going to have all 110 items of the NIST 800-171, as well as those extra 30 items for the 20 items for the CMMC level 3, and it's going to state where you're at in terms of compliance, non-compliance. Maybe you're partially compliant, maybe it doesn't apply to you. So you're gonna be able to use that kind of as a roadmap to see where you're at and where you need to go. For those things that you're non-compliant or partially compliant in, we're also going to include an additional remediation plan. So this is not just pointing out the areas that you need to meet, but also giving you suggested steps for how to actually meet those requirements. And we also like to prioritize them. Everything needs to be done eventually, but we like to kind of highlight certain things that can help you overall more than others. Additionally, we are going to provide you with information from anything else that we do as far as site walkthroughs. So if when we go to your facility, we take a look at all the devices that are in place. We're going to give you information on that. Depending on the size of the company, we will also conduct employee surveys or employee interviews. The information for that will be included as well. So that's kind of the first part of the process. So you can use this information to see where you're at right now and then start to develop a plan for what you're going to need to do in the future. And that's known as a plan of action, or a POAM. You might have heard if you've looked into any 800-171 information besides this, which you need to have. You need to have a security plan in place to show what you're doing and a plan of action in place to show what you're going to do for the things that you're not currently meeting. Additionally, worked into this project is not just the initial assessment, but we are going to do a follow-up with you 90 days after the initial assessment. So we're basically going to kind of circle back with you and go, okay, what have you done since then? Then we can give you an updated report for that. And then we can also take a look at your plan of action that you've developed to make sure that that covers all of those areas that you weren't meeting before, and to see, what you're going to do and what the timeline is for those things. And then those two things are what really satisfies that DFARS clause for the Department of Defense currently. Now, when the CMMC comes through, you are going to need to have all of these things in place. A plan of action will not work. But as it is right now, having a security plan in place to show what you're doing and a plan of action in place to show what you're going to be doing and when is going to satisfy your DFARS clause. Additionally, once we're done through the whole process, you will receive a completion letter, basically stating that you have gone through this process, you have developed a security plan and a plan of action with our assistance, and then you can use this letter again as further documentation for any Department of Defense manufacturers or subcontractors that require you to meet a DFARS clause. And you can also use it as a marketing tool as well. I have people who are not in the DoD space at all that go through this process because they want to be able to say, hey, I've gone through this process. I want to show you as a customer that your cybersecurity is important to us. Here's what we've done. And this is, we have gone through this process with a third-party organization who has no reason to, act on our behalf. And they feel that we're doing what we need to do to be responsible with our cybersecurity. So those are the things that you're really going to get as a result of the assessment. And then in terms of intangibles, again, I like to encourage people to do this process before they do any sort of cybersecurity project, so they can get a good idea of where their money is best spent. So if you know that you're going to need to improve your infrastructure, you can go through this process, and then you could potentially save money as a result of it, because you know that you only need this sort of equipment when maybe you were looking on spending more money on something that you may not have needed. So those are just kind of a brief overview of what you're looking at and what you're going to gain as a result of going through this process.
Thank you, Paul. We have 3 minutes left for this morning's webinar. Everton, I'll ask you this question, and it also came through in the chat here. You and I just spoke about this earlier this morning. The 250 manufacturers that will have access to the 9-part teachable tools for self-assessment. Will they have to go through all 9 modules in order to be eligible for the certificate at the end?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And Paul, I believe you briefly touched on this in your last answer there regarding certificates and what a manufacturer will get out of this program in the end. We have a question coming through here from an attendee asking, after I have this assessment, how much might I spend to get the NIST certificate, and what is the ballpark cost?
Okay, so again, a misconception if you're not somebody who's in this space right now, or maybe you're just getting ready for it. The current DFARS clause is entirely self-attested. There is no certification currently. 800-171 is a guideline. It's not a certification like the CMMC is. So there is no official certificate that's given out. We don't give it, nobody gives it out. It doesn't exist. Usually what will happen is that if you're dealing with a Department of Defense prime manufacturer or with the Department of Defense directly, they will send you some sort of documentation or survey to fill out that's based off of the 800-171 to say, okay, check this box if you're meeting this requirement. If you're not, check this box and tell us what you're going to do. That is what that process looks like currently. There is no official certification for it. You can use our report and all of our things to kind of help build you those things that they're going to be asking so you can answer those questions properly, because a lot of times that's another thing that I hear from a lot of companies is, I've been given this thing and I don't know how to fill it out. So this will very clearly highlight to you what you're going to need to do. Now, as far as how much money you're going to need to spend to fully meet these requirements, unfortunately, that varies from company to company. Sometimes I'll go to a place and really all they'll need to do is just implement policies and training. That's more of an investment of time than an actual monetary cost, although time is money, certainly, but it's not going to require a big purchase up front. Sometimes I'll go into a company and they'll have all of their computers that are out of date running, Windows 7 or older. In those cases, then you're probably going to have to spend some money to actually meet those requirements. But again, that's what you can work into your plan of action. So you can actually say, okay, we know we're going to have to spend money. Here's what we're going to have to do. So really, to meet the 800-171 guidelines and to meet your DFARS clause, the immediate investment is just developing a security plan, developing a plan of action. How much you're actually going to have to spend to satisfy everything on that plan of action, that's going to vary from company to company based on what we kind of find in the assessment.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, everybody, that does conclude our program for this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and again, taking time out of your busy days to spend an hour here with us. Again, if you would like to register for the Department of Defense cohort, the registration link is on your screen. Feel free to reach out to us at any point in time. Everton, Paul, thank you very much for your time. And on behalf of Mohawk Valley Community College and the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing and also Fuse Hub, thank you very much. And our next webinar part 2 of the 5-part series will be on October 27th. With that, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Corey. Bye.
Bye.